Hello students, today we are going to talk about Stuart Hall encoding and decoding communication theory. Last time I was talking about lack of fit, and while discussing lack of fit, I gave you the funny example of how emojis often lead to what Stuart Hall says as lack of fit. Or in simple common parlance, you may say that emojis often lead to misunderstandings. And in here, we will talk first about language. Let me just go on suddenly from the theory as proposed by Stuart Hall to how language is formed. Now, for example, this is a pen, and I pronounce the word as pen, that is P-E-N or pen. Now, the moment, even if this particular object is absent and I call the word pen, right, I pronounce it like that, immediately the image of a pen comes to your mind. Why is this? This is because from your childhood, you have been taught that pen, that is the oral sound of pen, communicates to you a visual figure which looks like this, right? Which is very similar to this. Okay, you get the point, which here means the sign, and the sign here being pen, right? The signifier and the signified, that is the sign, has two parts. The signifier, that is the pen, the oral sound, and the signified, which is the actual pen, how it looks, shape, size, etc. Similarly, for example, cow, right? Cow is an oral sensation, cow. And the moment I say cow, you visualize the figure of a cow. That is how actually cow looks like, right? This is also because from our childhood, all of us have been taught the moment we hear cow, we are supposed to visualize and understand of the four-legged white animal, right? But as you can understand, this is because we had a conditioning to understand this, right? So signs are in general arbitrary. What do I mean when I say signs are arbitrary? So for example, today a toddler, I teach, okay, the moment you hear the word cow, that is the oral word cow, you're supposed to visualize something which is pen, right? So of course, I mean, the child is going to eventually understand that a cow looks like this, right? So as in simple terms, therefore, signs are very, very arbitrary in nature. What about audiovisual signs? You might say, but ma'am, a red rose looks like a red rose, right? So what is so complicated in understanding that? Yes, to a large extent you're true that a red rose looks like a red rose, but a small experiment, if I tell a garden of roses and I ask all of you to shut your eyes and think about the garden of red roses, and I can say it for sure that all of you are going to visualize a different sort of red rose. Okay, a different idea of the rose. Now, this is the point which Stuart Hall also is trying to make by talking about lack of fit or so on. He's talking about the relative autonomy between what is being encoded and what is being decoded. So there is, these two stages are kind of separate from each other. Each stage will affect the message or product being conveyed as a result of the discursive form. And when he says each stage, he also takes into consideration the decoding stage. Remember, I was talking about magic bullet and so on and so forth, which takes into consideration the first stage, that is when the sender is kind of encoding the message, but it's kind of trying to negate the presence or the role played by the decoded the person who is decoding it. He's talking about the relative autonomy of messages. Stuart Hall is saying that people understand or decipher or decode messages on the basis of a number of things, on the basis of the society, culture, trend, and so on. And in the process, in his essay, he's also giving example of signs. So for example, there's a swastik sign, right? The swastik sign. Now again, many of you, if I show the sign to you, you will say, oh, this is the swastik sign. You know what I mean. But some of you will also decipher the sign as, say, suppose the Hitler's, the Nazi sign, because both the signs are identical to each other. But it's an arbitrary, two people will decipher it and understand it in completely different sense altogether. So similarly, just like signs are arbitrary, here also he's saying connotative codes, right, are not equal always, right? So denotative and connotative is also very, very different. Or in simple, if this is difficult to understand, the decoding also happens as a result of a culture, society, so on and so forth. There's a lot of factors which come into play when you are kind of decoding the message which has been encoded by the messenger in a different manner altogether. So there's a relative autonomy between the sender and the receiver. There's a sort of relative autonomy between how the message is being encoded and how the message is being decoded. To explain what are the means and what are the ways in which the message is perhaps decoded by the receiver, Stuart Hall has again divided it into certain types. But before I discuss the types, I want you to watch a small clip from the documentary film by Michael Moore called Fahrenheit 9/11. Let's go ahead and watch the clip.
You can make people do anything if they're afraid.
The FAA has taken the action to close all of the airports in the United States.
All commercial and airline traffic was grounded.
When we had some airplanes authorized at the highest levels of our government to pick up Osama bin Laden's family members and transport them out of this country.
In the middle of the war, corporations decided to hold a conference to figure out how much money could be made.
Once that oil starts flowing, it's going to be lots of money. Whatever it costs, the government will pay you.
It's going to be good for business, bad for the people.
The documentary which you're seeing right now is Michael Moore's documentary, Fahrenheit 9/11. And the documentary deals, of course, which is pretty evident, is about the unfortunate incident of the assault of 9/11. The political documentary, released in 2004, serves as a treatise between the Bush administration. It highlights Moore's, that is the documentary filmmaker, how it sees the government corruption and disinformation by the former president and his staff in the wake of September 11, 2001 terrorist attack, and of course which leads up to the American invasion of Iraq. At the time of its release, Fahrenheit 9/11 was a critical success, sparking widespread debates about the United States' involvement in Iraq and raising public outcry against the Bush administration as well as its policies.
Comes the true story that will make your temperature rise.
Now you might be thinking that why suddenly talking about Stuart Hall and his communication theory, I showed you a documentary by Michael Moore. That's because this is going to talk about a very important point which Stuart Hall is making. Now, as you remember, the last time I was speaking about how Stuart Hall believes in the relative autonomy. Now, the moment you say there's a relative autonomy between a person who is encoding the message and the person who is decoding the message, or the moment you say that the decoder is powerful, right? So now the person who is receiving the message actually decodes it according to in various ways the person decodes it. Now, one simple way of understanding is how does the person decode it? The person will decode it as per his age, of course, right? If there's a toddler sitting, the toddler will decode the message in a different manner than perhaps what you are decoding, according to your personal belief system. Of course, the decoding will happen on the basis of the culture, right? So which culture do you belong to? Like if I say that you should wear black or white while mourning, so that will depend on your religion, your culture, your belief system, and so on and so forth. Gender, sometimes gender also kind of leads to different understanding of the text. So for example, yesterday I was watching the film on Netflix, Darling, right? And to me it was completely okay, right? The film was about how this woman kind of raises her voice, and not just voice, her hands against against the wife beater, that the husband who was very oppressive. But I have also, at the same point of time in news, I heard that there's a lot of people who are saying that the film should be banned and so on and so forth. Why? Because they're saying that it's very it's leading to a culture of beating up men. So I think gender also leads to a lot here, how the message is being deciphered or how the film is being perceived by the audience. Gender plays an important role in that. So that's how a very contemporary example of how gender leads to different kind of decoding of the same message. Life experiences. Calcutta is a beautiful city. To some life, because of your personal experiences, you might agree. Some people might not agree. And I like this one point which I completely agree. And there are many scholars or people who don't take this into consideration. Is also the mood of your mood at the time. What is your mood like when you are receiving the message? So I gave you the example of, you of course won't like my lecture if you are hungry, right? So, or if you're sleepy, and so on and so forth. So these are some of the basic examples. So taking all this into culmination, and going back to Stuart Hall and 9/11, though I think I digressed a bit, what Stuart Hall is saying, that now audience is powerful, audience is the decoder, audience is decoding according to certain values. So these are the 4 kinds of reading what can happen, right? These are the 4 ways an audience might interpret the message. And let's take the example. When I say message, just to give it a point of view, let's take the message which Michael Moore Fahrenheit 9/11 is giving. What is Michael Moore Fahrenheit 9/11 is giving? It is making us question Bush administration. In the sense, American involvement, in the sense that when Michael Moore is questioning how Bush administration had kind of close ties with Al-Qaeda and so on. It's actually questioning the government itself, right? Rather than portraying America as a victim, which is kind of the dominant or the preferred reading. Here I come to what Stuart Hall says. One of the most important way of reading of the message is the dominant or the preferred reading. This is what the dominant or the preferred reading means. The dominant reading is where the receiver, because we are prominently talking about the receiver, accepts the media put in front of them and interprets it in the exact way that the author of the text intended them to. An example of this is within a news report being shown, which could potentially be based if coming from one point of view and accepting every details of the report, not questioning the text in any way. Let me give you 1 or 2 examples. Kolkata is a lovely city. You accept. Yes, of course, she's saying so, and she's saying it in a MOOC lecture. So Kolkata indeed is a beautiful city. This is where your reading, in the sense, the audience reading is the dominant reading. I intended to give you a message in certain way, and you received the message in a exactly similar manner, right? Or other examples can be, if I take the example from 9/11, not the 9/11 film, that's Fahrenheit 9/11, but if I show you some of the common clips which were circulating in media at that point of time, it kind of showed America as in the position of a victim. Right? It showed that how the American administration itself was also a victim when it boils down to the incident. Right? Now, I encoded the message in a certain way, and I kind of gave it to you, and you kind of completely realized that yes, because this was a text which was going out everywhere, that America is in a way a victim of the 9/11 incident. Right? Not just American people, the American administration, the nation in general was a victim. So if I in the sense, if a lot of people did do, a lot of news reports most of the news reports were circulating this idea, and if you completely believe in those ideas, if you completely believe in what was being said at that point of time, then basically your reading is the dominant reading, the reading which was intended to by the person who was sending these messages. So that's the dominant reading. That's called the preferred reading. In fact, Stuart Hall also calls it the common knowledge or the common sense meaning, right? So commonly, sometimes the dominant reading comes from a lot from the dominant understanding, right? I call it a herd mechanism, right? So it's very intertwined with the herd mechanism. Sometimes what everybody is saying, we kind of believe it, and therefore we read media text in a certain manner. We don't question them. And therefore I come to the next 2 points which Stuart Hall is saying. We therefore are not in a negotiated position or in a oppositional position. Now what is a negotiated position? And the reason why I showed you Fahrenheit 9/11 is basically to make you understand what is a negotiated position. Let me give you an example of my classroom. When I ask my class about 9/11 or what is this incident about 9/11, and I show them some clips of 9/11, that is the clips from the YouTube which are existent about 9/11, and all of them say that, ma'am, it was a very unfortunate event for America and, and of course, and no one says or questions that the American administration's involvement in 9/11, so to say. So we all know, I mean, I'm not going into, of course, I can show you 1 or 2 clips and so on. But then after I show them the documentary, that is after I show them the documentary 9/11, many of them start questioning, right, the very idea that, if that's so, was actually America the victim? Right now, I'm not trying to, take sides with any parties. I'm not saying Iraq was correct and so on and so forth. But the very fact that the questioning is happening, somebody's questioning brings the group of students to a position which rather can be called as a negotiated position. So they might be, okay, it is a possibility that America was a victim. That is, America in the sense American. I'm not saying the innocent people who died in that incident, but I'm talking about the administration. That, okay, it's a possibility that American administration was at fault, a victim. But at the same point of time, a certain group of students come to a position where say, but is that so? Because what the documentary is indicative of is that there was tie-ups between Saddam Hussein and between the Bush administration, or Bush administration had monetary benefits and tie-ups. And so what is a negotiated position? If I go on to the definition, a negotiated position is a compromise between the dominant and the oppositional. Oppositional means I do not believe in what is being said, or what is being said is completely wrong, right? An oppositional position where the audience, that is you, accept parts of the producer's view. In the negotiated position, you accept parts of it. You don't accept it completely, like in the dominant or the preferred meaning, and you don't kind of negate it completely, as in the case of the oppositional meaning. You kind of accept parts of it, or you believe, not believe, somewhere in between, right? And this can occur if there's a combination of some of the above. So I think you got the idea of what I mean by a negotiated position. Of course, oppositional position is somewhere where you completely negate the idea, where you say, no, what media is saying is completely rubbish, and I kind of completely disregards it. So you say, even if she's saying Calcutta is a beautiful city, Calcutta is the worst city to live in, right? That's completely oppositional position. Or when you say that, okay, Calcutta might be a good city to live in, but then so and so and so and so might not be, that great. So then you are in a negotiated position. So what is an oppositional reading? When the audience kind of rejects the preferred meaning, rejects what was initially the intended meaning by the encoder, and creates their own meaning for the text. Completely different meaning is being deciphered. This can happen if the media contains controversial themes that the audience members completely disregards or completely disagrees with. It also arises when the media has complex narrative structures which perhaps are not dealing with the same ideas as proposed in the dominant understanding, which means that something is a very common knowledge, something is very common understanding, right? And when there's a media content which is kind of disregarding the common understanding. So sometimes people go into completely oppositional reading. So some people might watch Fahrenheit 9/11, that is the documentary, and say, no, 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 what is rubbish they're saying? Right? Of course, America was a victim. Look at how many people died how many American people lost their lives, right? In the incident, right? And this kind of ideas might come from maybe you had a personal loss, right? Of course, somebody who had a personal loss will be very, very emotional about what happened. So it is a possibility that one might go into a completely oppositional reading, where if I go back to again some of the media content, what was going on around 9/11 at that point of time, some people in the news, it was there in the news that some people were actually cheering and happy about 9/11, looking at the Twin Towers being hit and so on and so forth. Right? Now, this was very alarming to us. So, of course, these people who were cheering the news had a completely different understanding, were completely oppositional to the idea. So they did not believe that America was at all a victim. So this is not, not talking about the documentary, I'm talking about the media texts which were circulating during 9/11, after the incident and so on. The reason why I showed you the film, because the film kind of can take a group of students to all of these positions. It can take someone to a negotiated position, or it can take someone to an oppositional position when it comes to the incident of Fahrenheit 9/11. Of course, the common and the most common knowledge and the most way the texts have been read is as in the text around 9/11 circulating in YouTube and so on have been read from a dominant or a preferred position. On that note, students, we end our discussion on encoding, decoding. Thank you.